Hi, everyone, and welcome to week 5. We're about halfway through the course right now. I hope that you're learning a lot and that you're enjoying the content. Please feel free to reach out to me anytime if you have questions about the lectures or if you just have questions about TechCon that I can help you with. I'm happy to respond to any of you. I'm also enjoying our discussions on the discussion boards. Enjoyed getting to know each of you, and I look forward to continue doing that over the next 5 weeks. So let's get into this week. This week we're going to be focusing on usability. So the concept of usability really begins in the computer industry. And originally, as we mentioned in earlier lectures, documentation was really the kitchen sink philosophy. Everything was included, everything was considered important. And it wasn't written by technical writers or usually any writers. It was generally developers who may or may not have English as their first language. So that also made it very difficult to read the English instructions. So as Apple and Microsoft start making more computers and they're becoming widely available to the general public, these two companies are the first among all companies to create usability departments. And they want to create usability departments because they want to get feedback on these documents, and they want to make sure that they're providing what their users need, especially for users who might have a computer for the very first time. Now, today we are generally used to working with computers, depending on your age. But at some point, for a lot of people, it was something brand new. Maybe you were already in high school when computers were widely available, or, maybe your parents remember not having a computer. You may also not remember having a computer yourself. But as we progress in time, a lot of people are very familiar with computers and would think, why would we need all this documentation? Well, Microsoft and Apple needed to let people know how to use this device that they had never seen before. To go into what usability really is, we're going to look at a couple definitions from different people in the field. And the first one I'm going to start with is Jakob Nielsen. You'll notice that he's on your discussion board for this week. We're going to be looking at his works throughout the next couple of weeks as well. Jakob Nielsen is sometimes called the king of usability. You can make your decision up after we read through some other materials and decide if you agree with that. Nielsen is really around since the start of the web. And if we were in class, I might ask you to guess when that was. For those of you who were not around then, it was actually 1994. I had to look it up myself because I was quite young at the time. And so around 94, and even before that, Jakob Nielsen is involved with usability. He does a lot of research, and he sets up on his website what are called alert boxes. And that's actually what you're going to be using in your discussion this week. You can see I listed a link below for you to go check out. So we want to look at what is usability to Nielsen. To him, it's a quality or attribute that assesses how easy user interfaces are to use. The word usability also refers to methods for improving ease of use during the design process. So Nielsen is really looking at usability from a standpoint of before we release a product, we're going to do usability testing, we're going to see what needs to be fixed, and then we're going to release it. There's going to be different opinions on that as we go along. So here's another definition that we have on usability that is probably more accessible than what we just went over with Nielsen. Usability means making products and systems easier to use and matching them more closely to user needs and requirements. So this is one that's from usability.net. And now let's take a moment and really just think about the terms that they're using in this definition. So we're making products and systems easier to use. Easier to use is what's inherent here, but easier to use for whom and in what conditions and in what environment. You could also say in what kind of corporate setting. You may also think about who is making these products and the systems and their relationship to the users. And then the last part is matching them to user needs and requirements. So we have a concept that suggests we want to equalize with the use of the word matching. But what are the user needs and requirements? How do we know what they are? Beyond informal and formal usability testing, we also have usability research. So these are actually very different things. Usability research is actually about studying and researching what makes products usable and efficient. It's really just designed to answer questions by understanding usability standards. For instance, what people do and why they do it. Whereas usability testing is all about particulars. It's really a specific document with a specific user in a specific context. So as we go to your project, you're going to be noticing that you're going to be testing a very specific document. You're going to have your users, and it's going to be in a specific context. So think of it as with usability research, this can apply to a broader audience, whereas usability testing is more specific to a certain product and audience. Now, the third definition that we have is from usability.gov, and this is actually another really good resource for you guys. This definition said, in general, usability refers to how well users can learn and use a product to achieve their goals and how satisfied they are with that process. So you'll start to see that this definition is really different. The previous definition thought about usability from the perspective of the company, the creator, the designer, whereas this definition talks about usability from the perspective of the user. And I saw on the discussion boards when we talked about readability that a lot of you guys really wanted more user focus, and you like the ideas that talked about readability from the user's perspective, what the user's personal experience brings to the readability of a document, or in this case, the usability of a document. So this really is shifting the focus from that previous definition. So before we focus on the creator, now we're focused on our consumer. And we're going to take a closer look at the Shriver reading, and you'll see a project for usability and start thinking about what you need to do for your own project. And you might be using one of these definitions to relate to usability. You might be using a combination of all of them. Now, who does the usability testing? In this section, I'm really simplifying it by saying that there are two groups. One is going to be usability specialists, and then the other is you guys. So for usability specialists, what I'm talking about are members of product design team who are responsible for collecting feedback from users about the product or the document. This could be on a UX team, user experience. It could be a specific usability group. It could be a documentation team testing documents. But what the job of that person is to make sure that the product or document is usable, but also meets the company standards. You might also have to meet government standards. In the case of accessibility, you might have different standards that you have to meet. I spoke about that a little bit in another lecture. Accessibility is really important, and if you don't have a user who is impaired in a certain way that's testing your product or document, you might be missing something that to them would be obvious, but to us who can see and can touch the computer and interact with it, we may not pick up on little things that another user would need help with. These usability specialists are generally trained. They are professionals. They have some sort of certification. Certainly they could have gone to college for it, but really they want to, like the rest of us, improve the documentation from the usability standpoint, from the point of the user. So then we're looking at you guys and you as professional communicators who recognize the need for feedback from your users and as a way to improve and make a quality product. Now, you may have just taken a course like this. Maybe you have a lower level certification, or maybe you're just a Nielsen fan and you've read along with some of his alert boxes and you have an attention to the usability. You probably don't have significant professional training, but you're a champion for usability. And what I mean by that is that you may not conduct it yourself, but you're championing championing for your company to do that type of research or testing. In my professional experience, it's a lot easier to convince your company to do research over testing, just because of the resources available and funding, but both are very important in usability. Now, I want to also offer you a definition of what usability testing is. So, usability testing is figuring out whether and to what extent a project has met the needs of its intended users. And by project, I mean product, document, whatever you're usability testing. In our case, it's going to be a website in the future. So again, you want to break down the words that we're using here. We're talking about whether the product is meeting the needs of the intended users. And all of these concepts are something that we need to think about ahead of time for usability testing as we're developing it, because it's going to affect how we produce our test. So usability testing can follow informal or formal methods. And what I mean by formal methods are a test that's done in a lab. There's a very specific protocol. You have an environment set up. You may have eye recognition software. That's great if you work for a company that has that. By informal methods, I mean that you're gathering users. You probably don't have the best equipment, but you have a means to record them, whether that's by hand or by a device like a cell phone or another recorder, and you're having that user complete a series of tasks. And in most cases, in all cases, it's best to have a typical user that is a realistic user. But in a lot of cases, if you're at a company, you might just have your coworkers to do usability testing on. You may not be able to interact with the customers. And that's certainly another way that you can get your usability testing done. Now, there's different ways to collect your feedback. One of the first one is task completion. Did the user complete your task or not? There's another one called recall. You might ask the user a question from a passage that they read and see if they recall the information. And then there is another mechanism called protocol-aided edits. And by this, we're really talking about the think aloud concept. So you have a user who's going through some sort of a task, and you're asking them to think out loud. So anything that they're thinking in their head, we want them to say out loud. Like if they are searching at the top of the document, you want them to be saying why they're at the document. They might say, I'm looking at the top of the document because usually documents have some sort of a heading, and I'm looking for a way to organize this document. And you'll see that I included a quote by Chris Notter, who's a course instructor on lynda.com. That is a pay site, unfortunately, but he has a usability course that's really great if you're interested in checking it out. And he really says that it removes the need for him to ask questions of the participant. We don't need as many follow-up questions if we're asking the user to think out loud. And if some of the concepts of Notter also sound familiar, Notter worked alongside Jakob Nielsen for quite some time. Both are still in the industry, still doing either professional work or research. Chris Notter is more on the professional side right now, but they are both great resources for you. And then again, it could be a test that's in a lab environment, or you could be looking at the user that's sitting in their work environment. Now, we're about to run out of time again on Screencast-O-Matic, so I'm going to try to wrap this up really quickly. For analysis, we're looking at recording data, then analyzing it, and figuring out what we need to do with our results. By recording it, I mean that you are using some sort of a device. We want to make sure that you're recording it appropriately. Always test everything that you're working with. If you lose a recording, it's lost, and that participant's feedback is lost, because you can't retest the same person again. They already know what the task is, what they have to do. It's considered invalid. So always make sure that you're testing your device and any sort of environment that you're working in. And then last, it's about implementing the document changes. So we're talking about revising the document and meeting the needs of the client based on data that you obtained during the testing. That involves making suggestions to the client based on actual data that you can supply for them. And that's something that you would really have to back up, especially if it's after or if it's something